Every time I see the brand Budweiser in a bar today, I smile. It's an amazing beer with a great history, and we all need to talk about that because it's so important to the success of the brand going forward. I've gone back and studied Budweiser in its infancy. How did it ever become in the first place a brand? Why was it so vitally important? The main reason I believe it came about was out of necessity to our own employees here at the brewery here in St. Louis. You go back in time and you study how millions of Germans, including my ancestors, came to this country in the middle 1800s. And what did they leave behind? They left behind all kinds of traditions, religion, friends, family, but also they left behind their beer. And when they got off the boat, wherever they landed, my ancestors landed in New Orleans, a lot of people landed in New York, first thing they looked for was beer. Beer was part of their culture. And to be perfectly honest with you, the beer in this country did not measure up at all. So you couldn't just go home. You were here, you had to go forward. So you had some people that were just sad. They were missing their home, they couldn't even have a beer that they liked. And they were drinking our beer and they were making our beer here at the brewery, but the joy wasn't there. And Anheuser-Busch recognized that, and he used to travel back to Europe every summer when the brewery was down and taste beers, and he knew the big difference. So out of that came this Budweiser project, along with his friend Carl Conrad, who was a local businessman here in St. Louis. So they said, what can we do? Well, the real mitigating factors about beer at that time were the raw materials we were using. The malt was not very, very good quality. Water was fine. The hops were pretty good, so it was pretty much the malt. What we had to do was we had to mitigate those malted barley notes in the beer at the time. And the only way to do that, and even though it was more expensive, was to bring some rice into the process. Those people in the world that drink sake today, it's dominated by fermentation. There is absolutely no raw material taste in sake at all. It's dominated by fermentation. So by putting in 30% rice in the brew, we were able to push down the poor effects of the barley malt and then raise up the fermentation characteristics of the brand. That in combination with the wonderful Saaz hops that we were using from Europe gave really a winning taste profile to the brand. Second thing they had to do, it also had a problem with the yeast settling out too rapidly in lagering and not finishing the beer. So the brewers at that time, not just Anheuser-Busch, but all lager brewers, came upon the use of beechwood. And what beechwood does is it's a very neutral wood. Those of us that have had a Christmas tree at Christmas time, you bring the tree in the house, the whole house smells like a pine tree. Not good in the brewing process. You have to find a wood that's actually very, very neutral in aroma and taste. So what they did was they found these beech trees growing locally. They harvested them, they shaved them into chips that were slightly curved. They boiled them at that time in caustic, not baking soda like we do today. And at the end of those boils, you ended up having a very, very neutral smell. Wood didn't supply any color or taste or anything to the beer. Layer them on the bottom of the tank so that when that yeast starts prematurely settling on to the bottom, it'll land on the chips. The fermentation will drive the beer through the gaps between the curved chips, come in contact with more of the yeast, and finish the beer. So that was number 2, beechwood chips. Number 3 was one of the brewers at the time said, what if our yeast is not healthy? What if our yeast is not as alive as it can be? Then what do we do? Because the beechwood chips, although wonderful, they aren't finishing it completely, and that's where krausening came in. They said, all right, what if we did this? What if we brought over 75% of the beer, of the tank volume in lagering with the beechwood chips on the bottom, bring that over from fermenting, and then the following week, when the new beer is just starting to fermenting, call the fermenting cellar and say, I need some beer, and they would bring over freshly yeasted beer that was just starting to ferment, and they would top up all those tanks from 75 to 100. So we added fresh yeast, a little bit of sugar. They closed the valves on the tank, allowed the tank to pressurize, naturally carbonating the beer. Then we pasteurized beer for the first time in this country. Pasteur had just done his work. So now we had a way of actually stabilizing the beer microorganism-wise. The other thing we wanted to do is keep the beer cold. So we built ice houses along the railroad lines, actually built our own refrigerated railroad car company to actually take the beer from the brewery, stopping along the way, throwing ice in the cars, taking it coast to coast. and we were able to get the beer really, really fresh to the people. So the combination of the use of rice, the use of beetroot chips, the use of krausening actually made this Budweiser brand extremely drinkable, very similar to the brands they had back home. The employees were happy, and not only that, our employees were connected across the country with a lot of the other 5 million Germans, so we had a network in place. Has Budweiser always been the king of beers? Well, in its first year it wasn't. It became the king of beers when it became phenomenally successful. I think probably, if I were to go back in time, when it became a true nationwide brand, when you could have a Budweiser almost anywhere in the country in any major city, I think at that point, because it was a nationwide beer, people say it's the king, because it's everywhere, it's wherever I go, and it's in good shape. I can actually enjoy it wherever I am. In 1852, even before it was Anheuser-Busch, the first year of its existence, the company only sold 200 barrels of beer. That's it for the whole year. By 1876, we were right around 30,000 barrels of beer. Pretty respectable, especially for a local brewer here in St. Louis. But by the year 1900, we sold 1 million barrels of beer, all on the backs of Budweiser. The brand Budweiser became the first nationwide beer brand, revered across the whole country, and actually started to be shipped to other continents. And it's all built on the backs of wonderful brewing techniques that were used, and advent of ways to keep the beer fresh right to the consumer's mouth. And we're still following those principles today. You know, a Budweiser in a bar is always fresh, always great to drink, easy to drink, good with food, and it's because of all of this history about the brand. And if you talk about that and extol that story, the brand is just phenomenal. In fact, I can't think of any other brand in the world right now that has this phenomenal story of brewing a beer to meet the needs of the people at the time with technology that had just surfaced at the time, and then also transportation to get the beer to the consumer far away from the brewery in still good shape. These things at that time were just revolutionary. And I think that story, along with the fact that Budweiser just tastes so good, will actually drive the sales forward in the future. So every time I see the brand Budweiser in a bar today, I smile. It's an amazing beer with a great history, and we all need to talk about that because it's so important to the success of the brand going forward.